Hello everybody, this is a video that's part of a larger series of videos focused on the anthropology of warfare. And here we're going to look at some research that Ian Morris provides in his book, War, What Is It Good For? This is part of chapter 6 and talks about the evolution of war and how war could actually come within humans but also other species. So we're going to be talking about what game theory is. We're going to describe its application to understand the evolution and maintenance of violent competition within humans, and this is actually applicable beyond humans to other primates. Let's get started. Game theory is a simplified way to look at the world. It uses a model that doesn't try to mimic everything, all the complexities in the world, but instead simply says we're going to take a couple of variables, we're going to lay them out in a very simple mathematical way. We're going to look at how they interact to try to understand something about the world that we might not otherwise realize. Here it's a mathematical approach and says there are certain payoffs or certain penalties based on certain outcomes. The model that Morris is working with is from Richard Dawkin's work in The Selfish Gene. And it's talking about how there are critters that are competing for resources. These resources are food, their mates, their habitat, they're whatever it is that those critters need to live. And there's always a limited amount of any resource. So critters, animals, plants as well, but here we're talking about animals, are always in competition with one another for some of these resources. Dawkins' model holds that you're going to have two critters, and when they come into contact with each other and they're trying to pursue the same resource, whatever it might be, there's going to be a confrontation. They're going to compete with each other for that. The idea here is that there can be either a standoff or violence, or they can both just simply go away and surrender. Now, the violence is immediate violence. It's fighting with each other, and the winner gets the resource. The standoff is a situation where there's a prolonged engagement, the ruffling of feathers, the puffing of chests, the prancing around, the sorts of competition that we see that's not violence. There's no direct physical contact, but it's the sort of competition we actually see in the animal world all the time, with birds ruffling their feathers and trying to look bigger and intimidate opponents without actually hitting them or in any way directly engaged in violence. Now, the winner of these conflicts get 50 points. That means that they get the resource. And 50 points is just simply made up. The points don't really mean anything. It just means that they get the reward. The loser gets nothing. The loser just simply goes away. If one of the creatures is hurt, in other words, if there's violence and the creature is hurt, whether it be the winner or the loser, they get a negative 100 points. In other words, they have a penalty, it's a very severe penalty from being hurt, which impacts their ability to get future resources. And if there's a long conflict, both the winner and the loser invest time and effort in that. And so there's a cost that goes along with it because they're not able to do other things while they're involved in the conflict. So there's a negative 10 points for that conflict. Let's see how these play out given different strategies. In the first case, according to Dawkins' model, there are two doves. Now, we're not talking about literal doves. These are just simply critters that don't fight. There's no violence. So there's a long standoff. They puff themselves up, they yell at each other or squawk at each other. They do all sorts of things to try to intimidate each other, but they don't actually engage in violence. So anytime there's a standoff, it always takes time. For sure, everybody gets negative 10, just simply because of the lost time. So the winner of this competition gets plus 50 for winning, gets negative 10 for the time lost in the competition, so a net benefit of 40 points. The loser gets 10 points for the lost time, gets nothing for the competition itself, and so the loser comes off a little bit worse. Would have been better if they had just simply walked away, but they pay a price. The winner gets 40 points. This creates an average outcome of 15 points across the two animals. This is an evolutionarily stable strategy, meaning that there's a net positive benefit. You could have animals that behaved this way because not every time will a creature typically win or lose. Sometimes they'll win, sometimes they'll lose. If you have a creature that always loses, that creature will be selected against, and those genes will drop from the record, from the population. But most of the time, some animals will win, sometimes they'll lose, and on average, the net outcome is positive. The next iteration of this model holds that now hawks develop. Now, hawks always fight. There's no standoff. The hawks just simply fight, and as a result, the doves run away. So now we get a situation where we have doves that are competing with each other through their long standoff, but when a hawk encounters a dove going for the same resource, the hawk always wins, the dove always runs away without any sort of standoff. So the hawk gets 50 points for winning. The loser dove gets -0. Because the dove ran away to go forward somewhere else, there's no time loss, and so there's no penalty to the dove. The average outcome is plus 25, but the hawk always wins. In this particular case, then, the hawk has increased fitness relative to the doves, and the hawks are going to become more common in future generations. As the number of hawks increase, hawks will start encountering other hawks. So now there will always be violence when they face each other. The doves would have run away, but when you get two hawks, they'll actually fight with each other without any sort of long standoff. They'll just simply fight. This becomes more common as more and more hawks are present. Here, when the two hawks compete with each other, the winner will get 50 points, but the loser and possibly the winner will get hurt. Let's simply assume that the loser gets hurt. That's what Dawkin says, that the loser loses by being hurt and by being unable to continue the fight. The average outcome then is -25. So this is evolutionarily unstable. This is not going to lead to a consistent sort of a population growth. Instead, the hawks are being selected against in this environment because their strategy leads to consistently a negative outcome. They're being hurt, and they're being hurt in a way that keeps them from being able to compete for resources. So the outcome of this now is that any remaining doves will do better than the hawks. The remaining doves won't get caught up in the conflict, will just simply fly away, whereas the hawks will be hurting each other and ultimately will be causing each other to have poor evolutionary fitness. So the doves' numbers increase relative to the hawks. Eventually, you'll get to a place where you've got a stable mix of doves and hawks. Given the numbers that Dawkins gives us there, it'd be 5 doves for every 7 hawks. So there's going to be a cost for the hawks when they meet each other. Yes, one of them will win, but there's the very real possibility of being hurt. There's an evolutionary cost to the doves when they meet a hawk because the doves just simply fly away and they don't get the resource. But when the doves compete with each other, sometimes they get the resources, sometimes they won't. But here's the deal. The doves will actually do fairly well when there are too many hawks. The hawks will do fairly well when there are too many doves. You'll reach a balance where there's an optimal number of hawks and an optimal number of doves for the population, such that on average it becomes stable. This simplified model helps explain why we get violence within an evolutionary perspective. Even if we have animals that start off just simply puffing up and trying to intimidate each other, eventually, through the process of changing behavior, perhaps caused by genetic changes, most likely caused by genetic changes, we start to get some more aggressive, some more violent critters developing. They use violence, and it pays off for them. It helps them. But given enough time, there are enough of these violent critters that they will also start to use more peaceful methods as well. And as a result, you get a mix of various strategies. Sometimes a creature might be more aggressive, other times they might be less aggressive. Now, in the model, we're just simply saying you've got hawks and doves. A creature always fights, or a creature never fights. In reality, it's going to be more complex than that. Some creatures may fight in some contexts and may run in other contexts, depending on their needs or what the other creature looks like, what the competitor looks like. The point here, though, is that this model shows how we can have a situation in which we get violence developing within a population and how that can be evolutionarily sustainable. But why kill? You don't have to kill something to chase it off. In fact, most of the time, in most contexts, even when there's violence, killing isn't necessary. Often it's not even done at all. What happens is that there's some sort of a conflict. The two rams butt each other in the head or whatever. One of them proves that he or she is the stronger one, and the other one runs away. That is far less costly than having to kill something, because when you're trying to kill something, it's fighting literally to the death, and it increases the likelihood that you, as the attacker, might be hurt, as well as the thing being attacked, as well as your opponent. And so killing something increases the risk to the attacker beyond what the minimal risk would have to be. So it seems like it would be a poor choice to kill an opponent. Just simply beat the opponent and have the opponent run off. Looking at this evolutionary problem across species, what we see is that lethal competition is most likely in situations where we have cooperative violence, where there's an overwhelming force on one side, and there's the likelihood of being able to kill the opponent without incurring any cost or very little cost to oneself. This picture here is one of the examples we have of troops of chimpanzees fighting with one another. Chimpanzees will have situations where the male members of particular troops will actually go over into the territory of other troops and attempt to find isolated males to kill. This is a situation in which they fight the isolated males and kill the isolated males when they've got overwhelming force. But if they were to come across a group of other males, there'd be a lot of hooting and shouting and yelling, but there wouldn't be any actual physical conflict because the likely cost to both sides would be too great. When there's even odds, the chimps won't fight each other. But as in this case, when you've got 4 members of one troop versus 1 member of another troop, there's almost no danger to the group of 4. And that's when they will engage in the violence and they'll actually kill the members of the other troop. So animals from apes to ants engage in this sort of cooperative violence. And there are 3 general conclusions that can be drawn from the cross-species studies that we've got here. One is that the development of this sort of cooperative violence does not require advanced brains. If ants can do it, and ants don't really have brains at all, not meaningful brains, then it just simply doesn't require a lot of thinking. Second of all, sociability is required. For cooperative violence to occur, you have to have critters that are living together in some sort of a cooperative structure, where they're actually cooperating with each other outside of violence as well as part of violence. And then third, sociability is not sufficient in and of itself. There are sociable creatures that do not engage in cooperative violence. So sociability is a requirement, but it's not sufficient in and of itself to explain the presence of cooperative violence. The best explanation we have right now is that killing is beneficial in terms of future violence. If there's the real possibility that you're going to be facing this exact same creature again in the future, competing for the exact same resources or similar resources, then killing the creature outright, if you've got the ability to do so without substantially increasing risk to yourself, gives you a benefit. They can't fight you if they're dead. And as a result, if you can head off future violence by killing the opponent while you've got them down and out, while they can't really resist, and while you have limited risk to yourself, then from an evolutionary perspective, that becomes advantageous. Excellent. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please press the like button and subscribe. Have a great day.